Yo, Blue from the future here. This video was meant to celebrate the Veneziad finally getting printed and shipped out. Alas, delays upon delays upon delays. It is currently printing, but it'll be a few more weeks until it's out in the wild. In a perfect world, I would have bumped this devlog back, but the last month was a little busy and I had some other stuff going on. In case you missed our April 1st Not a Joke update video, I am literally recording this with an infant on my lap. In the meantime, you can check out our merch store where we've got all of our enamel pins available for spring cleaning, get what's in stock while the stock is in, and I will be hollering from the rooftops when this book is finally out. That's all from Future Blue, who is a dad now. Enjoy the video. The Veneziad began as a project. In my senior year of college, I took on a creative writing capstone class more or less for funsies, as I'd already finished my main degree requirements and Red and I were managing the transition from full-time school to full-time OSP. The project was extremely open-ended, and a friend of mine had a very bold suggestion. Hey Blue, you should write an adaptation of the Aeneid. And viewers, I don't know if this makes me dumb smart or smart dumb, because I loved this idea. So I tried to break down what it was about the Aeneid I wanted to capture. That list included the writing style of epic poetry, a historical setting, plots of journeys and war, and characters who are transparently metaphors for their home cultures. So to help me figure out my topic, I made a 3-page list of settings in world history that could feature a journey and a war. Overkill? Definitely. I had no idea what I was doing, but with a gigantic web of topics, I started narrowing it down to ones I felt confident I could write inside of a semester, and I landed on Venice. Specifically, a little-known war in the 1300s with outsized influence on Venetian history because of what didn't happen. Now, as originally devised, this story was half journey, half war, so we'd begin with our characters somewhere else, and they'd return to Venice to then fight and protect it. Good so far, but narrative travel time can be extremely boring, especially to Mr. Writerman McNovice over here. So if I couldn't give the characters anything to do besides keep sailing, I could give them something to discuss. That led me to plonking our heroes on the far side of the Black Sea and having them sail back across the entire Venetian world, passing their island dominions and major historical locales like Constantinople. And as a consequence of that, I could turn the journey into a reverse travelogue where the characters discuss the histories of Marco Polo, the Fourth Crusade, the Greek islands, the Adriatic, and the Venetian Lagoon itself, going backwards in time towards the origin of Venice. This gave the journey narrative presence beyond a scene transition and provided the historical context for what was at stake once they arrived back in the city. Now, I was quite pleased with myself for stumbling into that rather elegant construction, but I had one big problem. Those characters in question were just two people, the father Alessandro and the son Niccolo. It was 2018 and I was looking forward to that new God of War video game with Kratos and Boy, so I was at once inspired and influenced, but that dynamic felt a little too thin. So thanks to the diligent advocacy of Cyan and my college roommate, we got third character, Serena. And not only did she bring a lot more depth to the family dynamic with the addition of father-daughter, brother-sister, and whole family interactions, but this gave me a very tidy triangle of characters that could represent what I consider the 3 different facets of medieval Venice. Alessandro, literally defender, was the merchant heart of the city, providing for and protecting his fellow Venetians. Niccolo, literally victorious, was the warrior, the glory and dominion over the Mediterranean Sea. And Serena, come on, that one's a gimme, represented the tranquility and peace of Venice itself. All of these traits were true of medieval Venice, but it could be hard to reconcile them into one society. Not a bad allegory for a family. With Serena in the mix, things were fitting together really nicely. So I had my story concept and I had my characters. That got me to the actual writing process. Over my winter break, I built up a 1-page outline of the whole story at a glance to see where I was going and figure out what beats I needed to hit. Then I went back in and expanded that to an 8-page outline, with each chapter or book getting 2 pages. This fleshed out what happens when, who says what, how the characters are feeling, and what the more scene-to-scene flow was going to be. Nothing groundbreaking, just making the whole sequence of beats visible so that I could sort through the more complicated story choices while it was still unwritten and malleable. Then, with that laid out, I could begin writing out the story linearly, front to back. I personally can't bounce around writing scenes out of order or they'd never make sense, so I had to get every word on the page in sequence as if I was saying the words rather than just typing them. That was partly to keep that vibrant lyric quality at the heart of epic poetry, and partly because it was the same way I wrote scripts for videos. All in order. From January to April of 2018, I could measure time by what scene I was working on, with a few scattered memories of running out of my room to eagerly show a scene to my roommate. When it was all done, this first version of the Venetiad was 17,000 words, and for the purposes of a project for class, I had done far more than what was necessary. But I had some encouragement from friends, family, and professors to pursue this further. So after taking a year to get acquainted with post-college life, I revisited the story and began a long process of polishing it up. Now, permit me some fogginess on the exact details, as it's been a few years since. I didn't take any notes as this was happening, and legitimately the only way I can measure time in the early COVID years is by which apartment Cyan and I were living in at the time. But I was working on editing it in the background of 2018, 19, and 20, and ultimately deciding at the start of 2021 that I didn't want this sitting in storage forever. This was the year I'd do my damnedest to send it to agents, and if that fails, just publish it myself in 2022. Just as I wasn't letting this sit, I also wasn't going to beat my head against the wall of traditional publishing if I could tell it wasn't working. So in 2021, I got to workshopping. I wrote a query letter, synopsis, and started looking for literary agents. I knew I wanted someone who could actually understand the project and know what it needed, so I tried to be very scrupulous about who I sent this to. Agents who represented historical fiction with an interest in poetry and without an interest in romance novels. No shade, just not my thing. Pause for nobody to be surprised. I collected emails of agents and sent out queries in batches of 20, giving it a couple months for possible bites before trying again, and adjusting my strategy if necessary. I knew the format of my story was weird, but it was also rather short, at just under 30,000 words at the time. That's what's called novella length, and that's a tough sell in the trad market. In the second or third batch, someone asked me to mail them a manuscript, and wrote back that they really liked the concept and had a personal love for Venice, but just didn't think the market would accept it. I think I sent out another batch or two after, but this one stuck with me and confirmed my sneaking suspicion that this just was not a project for the traditional market. I had self-published before, and I'd do it again, but by this point it was the middle of the year and I was busy, so I put my head down and got back to making YouTube videos and also getting married in October. Busy bee. But with the wedding a success and the new year in front of me, I needed a palate cleanser. I knew this 2022 was going to be the year I self-published the book, hilarious, but I was very tired and wanted to get a jump on my next epic poem. So I ran away to the mountains for a few days, not a joke, and sketched out my next story. I researched my setting, outlined my plot, and wrote the first few scenes. I told myself this would be a shorter story, 7,000 words, the Veneziad's 30 at the time, so I would give myself the challenge of writing the story in meter. I successfully internalized iambic for the first time in my life after years of simply not hearing it whenever I read Shakespeare, and started scripting. This went well. Too well, because the scope of this project immediately got away from me, and after a few months of on and off writing between making videos, the final story clocked in at 18,000 words, and it was still entirely in meter. So once I find the moron who wrote it, I'm gonna slap him. Now, the end of the project coincided with me getting COVID twice. I got slammed in spring of 2022 during the first wave of rebound infections. Yeah, remember those? I was isolating in my office away from my darling wife, and I had nothing else to do. So I got the last stretch of scenes done in rapid succession in between episodes of She-Ra. Now, I'm not telling you what the story is or where it's set, because that's a surprise for later, and if I kept the Veneziad a secret for 6 years, I can hold this one for a couple too. But with this dramatic finish for Story 2, Draft 1, I pivoted back to the Veneziad and turned my focus to publication literally right as Brandon Sanderson launched his world-shattering secret project on Kickstarter. And that gave me ideas, ultimately leading me to a company called Wraithmarked, a boutique independent publisher who partnered with authors to essentially do the Brando Sando Kickstarter model. This made perfect sense to me because that's the same basic way we sell our enamel pins. This then would be the strategy. I had the model and I had my people to talk to. So I did not reach out to them for a year. Because I knew I needed one more draft's worth of edits and tweaks to get the story to where I wanted it. I hoped to hand them the absolute best version of the story I had the power to create on my own, because I figured it was rude to waste an editor's time giving notes on scenes and characters across a book I already knew needed more work. With no time to waste, I set on draft 5 and promptly got very sick over that summer. I like to think I can stay on top of tasks, but long COVID is no joke, and there were months it felt like I could not even think straight, with arguably very noticeable effects on my video output that summer. By the fall, I got better and got back to work on draft 5, finishing it, interestingly enough, the following spring in Malta on the last leg of my trip circumnavigating the globe to attend Hello Future Me's wedding in New Zealand. Red, Cyan, and Dominic Noble did the sensible thing and flew back across the Pacific the way we came. I did not do that. I should have done that, but I did not do that. So, Spring 2023, my draft was done, the Venetiad was as perfect as I by myself could make it, and I took it to Wraithmarked. And let me tell you, they loved it. The one tricky spot was the length of the book, but not because it made it any less valuable, but because fewer pages meant less room to put fancy art on the spine, which is the side of the book people will see most often on their shelf. At this moment in my video call with Wraithmarked boss Bryce, time slowed down and I played the card that would either sink me or seal the project's success. I told him I wanted to commission a translation of the book in Italian to put side by side with the English, thus immediately doubling the page count and solving the issue of spine real estate. Now, in years prior, I thought that if I was really lucky, after a decade or so of successful authorship, I might be able to convince a traditional publisher to make a super extra special edition of the book that would actually have the opposite-facing translation, making my dream of supreme classical literature vibes come true. But this was a pipe dream, right? Naturally, Bryce agreed to it immediately. Nice. He also paired me with author and editor T.L. Greylock, the person at Wraithmarked who had the background in poetry and classical literature to know exactly what kind of nonsense I was going for. The Venetiad was an assignment, and she understood the fuck out of it. So from there, we got to editing. She read through it and gave me lots of good notes sprinkled across the text with one very important note on the ending. It needed an epilogue. The ending, as written, was a bold choice on my part, drawing heavily on the finale of the Aeneid, where it feels like the curtain drops before you can lift your jaw off the floor. That was good. We wanted to keep that, but it would definitely benefit from an encore chapter. So, in the wee hours of January 2024, I wrote it out, following my same writing scheme from the very first draft back in college. Come up with a concept, figure out where I wanted these characters to end up after the dust of the main story settles, then outline it, fill it in, add detail, and then sit down and write it out linearly. Of course, the scope of the epilogue grew as I enjoyed spending time in this new status quo and wanted to draw out more depth from the characters' interactions, and by the time the curtain fell for real, it was 7,000 words, about a quarter the length of the main story. Most of the time when writing, I feel like I'm building a story idea, building an outline, building my prose. The epilogue, cheesy as it sounds, feels like how Michelangelo described sculpting. The figure is already in there within the marble, and I'm simply freeing it. I felt like the story of the epilogue already existed, like it already happened 600 years ago, and I was just getting it down on paper. It's not a case of divine inspiration, because what really happened was I just knew these characters. I'd known them for 6 years, and I knew in my head what would happen when I put them in this epilogue scenario. It's the only thing that could happen, and it might even be my favorite part of the story. But with that, the epilogue was done, and I was thrilled, not only because I just handed in my finished 6th draft of the Venetiad, but because my amazing team of translators, Irene La Preziosa and Luke Ranieri, would very soon finish their Italian version of the epic poem, La Veneziade. My Italian is nowhere near good enough to have written it, but it's good enough to read it, and man, they absolutely nailed it. They wrote it to meet the modern standard of the language, but with lots of fun archaisms sprinkled throughout to sell that historic feeling. The Venetiad could not have been in better hands. Now, both stories were done, and the only thing I had left to do was tell the world about it. That spring, I'd do just that, with a splash of 3 Venice-themed videos in a row discussing the brilliance of the Venetian Republic, the goofy theft of St. Mark's bones, and the magnificent Basilica di San Marco itself. I don't need to retread videos that already exist, but the madness is what happened behind the scenes, because neither Wraithmarked nor me had any idea the Venetiad would be so popular. Based on some napkin math from pre-campaign Kickstarter signups, we had a sense that we would land somewhere over $100,000 in sales. Maybe high 100s if people were jazzed, but definitely not into the 2s, right? Ha! Ha 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 ha! Hilarious. The first days of the campaign went well and very normal, but day 4 was a Friday, and I had a video that day, so things went nuts. From there, the Kickstarter broke all conventional wisdom about how campaigns play out. Usually, you get a big spike on day 1, plateau through the middle, and get one last jump before the closing bell. Instead, after that big Friday video day jump, we had nearly a steady slope up through the middle weeks and a final 5 days of pure spikeage. I won't relay the minute to minute, but suffice to say I was refreshing the Kickstarter page literally every hour of every day for 3 weeks. At every point we thought, well, surely this is where the momentum will stop. We'll never cross 200. We'll never get to the bookmark stretch goal. We'll never set the record for biggest Wraithmarked campaign of all time. We'll never get to full color printing, and we'll never ever ever cross 500,000 in sales. Well, look at us go. By the numbers, the Venetiad grossed $500,000 to Brandon Sanderson's 41, putting me at 1/80th a metric Sanderson, which feels appropriately small, but also very big? somehow surprisingly very big. The campaign was such a smashing success that the entire Wraithmarked company immediately got raises across the board, and the revenue will allow for investments Wraithmarked couldn't even conceive of before the campaign. As for me, after employee salaries, printing production costs, and Wraithmarked's investments for later, I will take home 15% of that total gross, which is the high end of industry standard for publishing. That comes out to $75,000, which is a lot, and I'm very grateful, but money is absolutely not the reason I did this. Cleo has plenty of snacks and plenty of toys. We don't need to get her a personal tuna chef, she would be insufferable. Books take passion, creativity, and a lot of time. Hour for hour, videos are a far more profitable use of time than books, and pins break the scale entirely. By the numbers, it's a mathematically unwise business optimization that we do anything other than make and sell pins. But we do because we love the art, the process, the joy of creating stuff. Of course, I am not the first YouTube creator/author to make the observation that publishing pays less than YouTube, nor the first person to conclude that, nonetheless, it's still absolutely worth it. Videos are a joy to make, but by the nature of the medium, they can feel a bit ephemeral. They only exist in the screen, and their nature is to pass you by. That's okay, that's the game, but I wanted to challenge myself and make something that nobody else could ever put to paper, at once so classic, yet so new, so vivid. Something that wouldn't be for everyone, but for readers who enjoyed it would stay with them forever. Books have presence, they're a little artifact to keep on your shelf or take with you on adventures, and now I've made one too. That's how I wrote an epic poem, and if I have anything to say about it, there's more on the way. Thank you for watching. If you want to get a copy of the Venetiad for yourself, they'll be available from our merch store soon. Contemptible four-letter word, soon. But soon, damn it. All right, back to the baby. Catch you next time.